Part 5, The Long Walk Home Admiral. Ji-Wan watched her fleet retreat from Earth orbit with growing fury. The humans had allowed the evacuation to proceed without interference, which somehow made the defeat even more humiliating. They did not need to destroy the remaining Krell ships. They had already won so completely that they could afford to show mercy. Commander Hyun-woo has betrayed the Dominion, she said to the officers on her bridge. When we return home, he will face charges of cowardice and treason. But even as she spoke, Ji-Wan knew the truth. Hyun-woo had not betrayed anyone. He had saved lives by ending a war that could not be won. She was the one who had failed. She had led the greatest military disaster in Krell history, and no amount of pride could hide that fact. Commander Hyun-woo coordinated the evacuation from the surface, ensuring that as many soldiers as possible made it to the transport ships. The humans maintained their promise, not firing on the fleeing Krell forces. But they did not make it easy either. Human fighters escorted the Krell ships as they climbed toward space. A clear reminder that they were being allowed to leave, not escaping. Major Bora flew beside a Krell transport, her fighters' weapons locked but not armed. Inside her helmet, she watched the alien ship struggling to reach orbit. Part of her wanted to feel sympathy for the retreating enemy. They had lost so much, suffered so greatly. But then she thought about what would have happened if the Krell had won. Her world would have been enslaved, her people subjugated. The aliens had brought this on themselves. Comet Squadron, maintain escort formation, she ordered. Let them leave, but make sure they remember this moment. The survivors of the invasion fleet gathered beyond the moon, organizing into a ragged formation that bore no resemblance to the proud armada that had arrived months ago. Ships were damaged, crews were exhausted, and morale had collapsed completely. They had come to conquer a primitive world and instead had been destroyed by that same world. Captain Da-Yoon stood on her new ship's bridge. Having been given command of a vessel after her original ship was destroyed, she looked at the blue planet in the distance, still beautiful, still peaceful in appearance. But she would never forget the fury that world had unleashed when threatened. A communication came from the human military. It was General Sung-ho, broadcasting directly to the Krell fleet. Before you leave, we want you to understand something. We did not want this war. We would have preferred peace. But you came to our home with weapons and demands, and we defended ourselves. Remember this day. Remember that Earth is not for conquest. Tell your Dominion. Tell every species you encounter. Leave us in peace and we will leave you in peace. Threaten us again, and the result will be the same. The message ended. Simple, direct, and absolutely serious. Admiral Ji-Wan wanted to respond with defiance, with threats of return, with promises of revenge. But the words died in her throat. What could she say? That the Dominion would try again? Who would believe that after this catastrophe? That the Krell would have their vengeance against a species that had just destroyed 7,000 warships? She said nothing. The fleet turned away from Earth and began the long journey home. The voyage back to Krell space took 3 months. During that time, Commander Hyun-woo compiled his official report of the campaign. He did not soften the truth or try to shift blame. He described every mistake, every miscalculation, every moment when the Krell had underestimated their enemy. His report was hundreds of pages long, filled with tactical data, strategic analysis, and harsh lessons learned. The most important lesson was simple. Never assume an enemy is weak just because they appear primitive. The humans had used technology that the Krell considered ancient, but they had used it with such skill and determination that it did not matter. They had turned their own violent nature into a weapon, channeling thousands of years of warfare experience into defending their world. Dr. Tae Yang added his own report, focusing on the biological and psychological aspects of the disaster. The humans were persistence hunters, he explained. They evolved on a high-gravity world with dangerous megafauna, learning to outlast and outsmart prey that was larger and stronger. They brought that same relentless determination to warfare. They did not stop. They did not give up. They kept coming until either they won or they died, and crucially, they had evolved fighting each other. Every tactic the Krell used, the humans had already encountered in their own wars. Every strategy had a counter-strategy developed over millennia of conflict. The Krell had brought nothing new to a species that had been perfecting the art of war since they lived in caves. As the fleet approached Krell space, Admiral Ji-Wan finally broke her silence. She sent a message to Hyun-woo, ordering him to her flagship. He came expecting to be arrested or executed. Instead, she simply asked him a question. Could we have won? If we had done things differently, could we have conquered Earth? Hyunwoo considered his answer carefully. No, Admiral. We could have destroyed their cities from orbit, killed billions, rendered their world uninhabitable. But we could never have conquered them. They would have fought from ruins, from underground bunkers, from the ashes of their civilization. They would have fought until the last human died. That is who they are? Ji-won nodded slowly. Then we were doomed from the moment we decided to attack them. Yes, Admiral. We were. The fleet arrived at the Krell homeworld to find that news of the disaster had already spread. The Dominion's other client species had learned about the defeat, and some were already questioning Krell authority. If the mighty Dominion could be humbled by a single world, what did that say about their supposed invincibility? Hyunwoo was not arrested. Instead, he was ordered to brief the High Council on what had happened. He stood before the ruling body of the Krell Dominion and told them everything. He described the human defenses, their tactics, their weapons, and most importantly, their psychology. He explained why Earth could never be conquered, why any species that tried would face the same fate as the Krell fleet. They are not pacifists, he concluded. They are not weak. They simply want to be left alone. But if you force them to fight, they will fight with everything they have. They will use their technology, their biology, their history, and their sheer determination to destroy you. The choice is simple. Leave Earth alone or face annihilation. The council listened in silence. Some wanted to authorize another invasion, larger and more carefully planned, but those voices were quickly silenced by the reality of the situation. The Dominion had lost nearly half its navy. Rebuilding would take decades, and there was no guarantee that a second invasion would succeed where the first had failed so spectacularly. In the end, the council issued a decree. Earth was to be classified as an interdiction zone. No Krell ships were to approach the system. No contact was to be attempted. The humans were to be left alone, avoided like a dangerous predator that was best not disturbed. Captain Daun was assigned to the diplomatic corps, tasked with informing other species about Earth and warning them away. She traveled to dozens of worlds, carrying her message to anyone who would listen. Some species dismissed her warnings. Others took them seriously. But all of them remembered the story of the Krell invasion that destroyed itself against an unconquerable world. Commander Hyunwoo retired from military service. He built a small memorial on his family's estate, a simple stone monument listing the names of the soldiers who had died in the Earth campaign. Every day he visited the memorial and thought about the lessons he had learned. He had spent 40 years conquering worlds, believing that military might was the ultimate form of power. Earth had taught him otherwise. True power came from the will to resist, the refusal to surrender, the determination to fight even when victory seemed impossible. The humans had possessed all of these qualities in abundance. They had turned their homeworld into a fortress not through superior technology, but through superior spirit. News of the failed invasion spread throughout the galaxy. Other species studied the Krell reports, analyzed the human tactics, and came to their own conclusions. Some saw an opportunity, believing they could succeed where the Krell had failed, but wiser leaders looked at the casualty figures and decided that Earth was best left undisturbed. The Krell Dominion never recovered from the disaster. Other client species began to rebel, emboldened by the knowledge that the Dominion was not invincible. Within 10 years, the empire that had ruled 300 star systems had collapsed into civil war and fragmentation. The attempt to conquer Earth had not just failed, it had destroyed the Dominion itself. 20 years after the invasion, former Captain Daun stood before a classroom of young officers at the newly established Interstellar Military Academy. The academy had been created by the coalition of species that rose from the Dominion's ashes, dedicated to teaching the lessons learned from past mistakes. Today, she began, we will study the Earth campaign, not because it was a great victory for anyone, but because it was a great lesson in hubris over confidence and the danger of underestimating your opponent. She activated a holographic display showing Earth, that beautiful blue world that had shattered an empire. The students leaned forward, eager to hear the story they had all heard before but never tired of hearing again. Part 4. Gravity's Crucible. The first Krell soldiers to land on Earth quickly discovered that victory in space did not guarantee victory on the ground. Commander Hyun-woo stepped off his transport ship and immediately felt the crushing weight of Earth's gravity pulling at his body. The Krell homeworld had lighter gravity, and most of their conquered territories followed the same pattern. Earth was different. Earth was heavy. Around him, soldiers stumbled as they attempted to establish a defensive perimeter. Every movement required more effort than it should. Their armor, designed to be light and maneuverable, suddenly felt like it was made of lead. Weapons that were easy to carry in space or on other worlds now dragged at their arms. "Form up," Hyun-woo ordered, trying to keep his own exhaustion from showing. "Establish firing positions and prepare for enemy contact." The Krell had landed in what their intelligence said was a rural area, far from major population centers. The logic was sound. Establish a beachhead away from heavy resistance, then advance on the cities. But as Hyun-woo surveyed the landscape around him, he realized that Earth had no truly empty spaces. In the distance, he could see structures. Human habitations scattered across the landscape, roads connecting them in networks that spread in every direction, and on those roads vehicles were moving. Lots of vehicles, all heading toward the Krell landing site. Dr. Tae-yang emerged from his transport, carrying medical equipment. He looked even worse than the soldiers. His breathing labored and his movements slow. "Commander, I need to examine the troops." Many are showing signs of respiratory distress. Earth's atmosphere has higher oxygen content than we are adapted for, and the gravity is affecting cardiovascular function. Hyun-woo nodded grimly. "Do what you can, Doctor. We may not have much time before the humans arrive." "They are already here," came Captain Dayun's voice over the communication channel. "All landing zones report contact with human forces. Light vehicles mounting heavy weapons, infantry using chemical projectile weapons. They are probing our defenses." The first human attack came 20 minutes after landing. A group of vehicles approached the Krell perimeter at high speed, firing weapons that use small metal projectiles accelerated by explosions. The bullets should have been ineffective against Krell armor and shields. They were primitive, crude, and ancient technology, but they worked. The kinetic energy of the bullets was enhanced by Earth's gravity. When they struck Krell shields, they punched through more easily than energy weapons would have. When they hit armor, they deformed and tumbled, creating larger wound channels. The Krell soldiers fell, not understanding how such primitive weapons could hurt them. Chan-woo watched the alien landing site through his rifle scope, a thin smile on his weathered face. He was 58 years old, a farmer who grew rice and vegetables on land his family had owned for 6 generations. He had never been a soldier, but he knew how to shoot. Every able-bodied person in his village knew how to shoot. The government had made sure of that, training civilians in basic combat skills for decades. "They are slower than I expected," he said to the young woman beside him. Her name was Soo-jin, and she had been a teacher before the invasion. Now she carried a rifle like everyone else. "The gravity is affecting them," Soo-jin observed. "Look how they move. Like they are walking through water." Chan-woo nodded. Earth had been waiting for this day, preparing for the possibility that aliens might not be friendly. They had studied what little they knew about other worlds and realized that most would probably have lighter gravity than Earth, so they had planned accordingly. Let the aliens land. Let them feel the weight of Earth itself pulling them down, then attack them when they were exhausted and struggling. "Pass the word," Chan-woo ordered. "Hit them from all sides. Keep moving. Do not give them time to adapt." Around the Krell landing zone, thousands of human civilians turned soldiers began their assault. They used tactics perfected over thousands of years of warfare on Earth. Ambushes, raids, harassment. They struck from unexpected angles, caused casualties, and then vanished before the Krell could respond effectively. The aliens' superior technology meant little when they could barely lift their weapons. Commander Hyun-woo tried to organize a counterattack, but it was like fighting ghosts. The humans appeared, fired, and disappeared into terrain they knew intimately. They used the hills, forests, and buildings as cover. They moved quickly while the Krell struggled with every step, and their numbers seemed endless. Worse, Earth itself was hostile. The Krell had not realized how dangerous the planet's biology would be. Small organisms in the air and water caused infections and even minor wounds. Local plants released chemicals that irritated Krell respiratory systems. The temperature fluctuated wildly between day and night, forcing the soldiers to constantly adjust their equipment. They had invaded a death world, and the death world was rejecting them. Medical Officer Yoon-ji worked in a field hospital that had been set up in a converted school building. She moved between beds treating human wounded, many of them civilians who had been injured fighting the invaders. The injuries were serious, but the people bore them with remarkable stoicism. They knew what was at stake. In a separate section of the hospital, Krell prisoners were being treated. Captain Da-eun was among them, her broken arm properly set and healing slowly. Yoon-ji checked on her regularly, making sure the alien captain received the same care as the human patients. "Why do you do this?" Da-eun asked, not for the first time. "We are your enemies. We tried to conquer your world." Yoon-ji sat down beside the bed, taking a moment to rest her tired feet. "Because we have rules. Laws that govern how we treat prisoners and wounded, even in war. We created these rules after our own wars became too terrible, too cruel. We promised ourselves that we would never abandon our humanity, even when facing inhuman enemies. But we would not show you the same mercy," Da-eun said quietly. "I know," Yoon-ji replied. "That is what makes us different from you." Da-eun looked around at the human wounded being treated with such care, and then at herself, an enemy being treated with equal concern. For the first time, she began to understand why the Krell were losing. The humans fought with terrifying intensity, but they never lost sight of what they were fighting for. They were not trying to conquer. They were trying to protect. And that made them infinitely more dangerous than any empire. The battle for Earth continued for weeks. The Krell tried to establish fortified positions, but the humans never stopped attacking. They struck at supply lines, ambushed patrols, and launched raids on command centers. They used weapons ranging from advanced missiles to simple booby traps. Anything that could hurt the invaders was used without hesitation. The Krell lost another 2,500 ships trying to support their ground forces. Human anti-aircraft weapons, some mounted on vehicles and others carried by individual soldiers, turned Earth's atmosphere into a deadly environment for Krell aircraft. Ships that had survived combat in space were brought down by missiles fired from hidden positions. Admiral Ji-won refused to accept defeat. From her flagship still in orbit, she ordered more attacks, more landings, more desperate attempts to break the human resistance. But her orders were increasingly ignored by commanders on the ground, who could see the truth she refused to acknowledge. The invasion had failed. Earth could not be conquered. Commander Hyun-woo stood in the ruins of what had been a Krell forward base. Human artillery had destroyed it 3 days ago, and the survivors had been forced to retreat. Around him, wounded soldiers waited for evacuation that might never come. Medical supplies were running low. Ammunition was almost gone, and the humans showed no signs of stopping their attacks. He activated his communicator and sent a message directly to Admiral Ji-won, bypassing normal communication channels. "Admiral, I am formally requesting permission to negotiate a ceasefire. We have lost. Further combat serves no purpose except to kill more of our people." Ji-won's response was immediate and furious. "You will continue fighting, Commander. The Krell Dominion does not surrender. Then the Krell Dominion will have no soldiers left to fight its wars," Hyun-woo replied. "I have served for 40 years, Admiral. I have conquered worlds and commanded fleets. I know the difference between a battle that can be won and a slaughter. This is a slaughter. We are dying for nothing." There was a long silence. Then Ji-won spoke again, her voice cold. "You are relieved of command, Hyun-woo. Return to the flagship immediately." Hyun-woo looked at the soldiers around him, young warriors who had trusted him to lead them to victory. Instead, he had led them to a world that was killing them slowly and painfully. He thought about the message General Sung-ho had sent before the battle began. The humans had warned them. They had said they would fight to the last person rather than surrender their world. The Krell should have listened. "No, Admiral," Hyun-woo said quietly. "I will not abandon my soldiers. If you want to continue this war, you will have to come down here and fight it yourself." He cut the communication and turned to Captain Da-eun, who had been released by the humans in a prisoner exchange. She looked haunted by what she had experienced during her captivity. Not because the humans had been cruel, but because they had been kind. Part 3. The Hornet's Nest. Admiral Ji-won stood before her remaining commanders, her posture rigid with determination. The losses at Mars had shaken the fleet, but she refused to show weakness. 9,100 ships still answered her command, more than enough to crush one primitive world. "We will not be intimidated by tricks and ambushes," she declared. "The humans exhausted their hidden weapons. Now we face them directly. All ships will advance to lunar orbit in battle formation. Maintain maximum shields and keep point defense systems active. If they have more surprises, we will be ready. Commander Hyunwoo wanted to object but held his tongue. He had reviewed the battle data repeatedly. The humans had not exhausted anything. They had simply tested the Krell fleet, studied their responses, and identified weaknesses. The real fight was yet to come. The fleet moved toward Earth slowly and carefully this time. Every sensor was active, scanning for threats. Every weapon system was charged and ready. But as they approached the moon, nothing happened. No hidden platforms attacked. No fighters swarmed out to engage them. Space appeared empty. That should have been a warning. When the fleet reached lunar orbit, they finally saw what awaited them. The moon itself bristled with weapons. Its surface was covered with railgun emplacements, missile silos, and laser batteries. Every crater hid a defensive position. Every human installation was a fortress. But that was not the worst of it. Between the moon and Earth, space was filled with thousands of objects. Ships, stations, satellites, and structures that Hyunwoo could not immediately identify. The humans had turned their orbital space into a maze of metal and weapons. "What are we looking at?" Jiwon demanded. Dr. Taeyang studied the sensor readings, his expression growing more horrified by the second. "Admiral, the humans have weaponized everything. Those are not just military vessels. I am detecting civilian ships, cargo transports, mining craft, even passenger stations. They have all been armed." "How many?" Hyunwoo asked, though he suspected he did not want to know the answer. "Thousands, Commander. Perhaps tens of thousands. And they are moving toward us." Scientist Haewon watched from the command center deep beneath the surface of Earth. Around her, hundreds of operators coordinated the defense of their world. On her screen, the Krell fleet appeared as red markers while Earth's forces showed as blue. The blue markers outnumbered the red by 10 to 1. "Activate swarm protocol," she ordered calmly. Across Earth's orbital space, every armed ship received the same command. Attack, not in formation, not with careful tactics. Just attack. Overwhelm the enemy with numbers, speed, and sheer audacity. The Krell fleet suddenly found itself surrounded by a swarm of small craft moving at impossible speeds. Some were military fighters piloted by trained soldiers. Others were civilian ships with volunteer crews. Many were completely automated, guided by artificial intelligence programmed for one purpose: destroy the invaders at any cost. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded military history. The Krell fleet tried to maintain formation, but the human swarm made that impossible. Small ships darted between the massive alien warships, too numerous to track, too fast to hit with large weapons. When the Krell destroyed 10 ships, 20 more took their place. Minna gripped the controls of her mining ship with steady hands. She had been a civilian 3 months ago, processing ore from asteroids to support Earth's industries. Now her mining lasers were weapons, and her cargo hold was filled with missiles that her neighbors had helped her load. She was 53 years old, with 2 grown children and 4 grandchildren. She was also absolutely terrified, but fear did not stop her. It never had. She targeted a Krell cruiser and accelerated directly toward it, firing her lasers at its shield generators. The shields held, but she had not expected to break through. She just needed to draw their attention. Behind her, 3 military fighters used her attack as a distraction. They slipped through the cruiser's defenses and launched missiles at its exposed underbelly. The cruiser's shields collapsed and more missiles followed, tearing into its hull. The massive ship began to break apart, its internal explosions lighting up the dark space. Minna veered away from the dying ship, already looking for her next target. Around her, hundreds of other civilian volunteers were doing the same thing. They were not soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, engineers, parents, and grandparents. But they were human and their world was being attacked. That was all that mattered. On the flagship's bridge, Commander Hyunwoo watched his fleet being torn apart by an enemy that should not exist. The humans were not fighting like an organized military. They were fighting like a disturbed nest of insects, swarming over everything in their path with no regard for their own survival. "We have lost another 200 ships," Captain Da-Yoon reported, her voice strained. "Point defense systems cannot track this many targets." "They are everywhere. All ships fire at will," Admiral Ji-won ordered. "Destroy everything that moves." The Krell fleet opened fire with every weapon they possessed, space filled with energy beams and explosive rounds. Hundreds of human craft were destroyed in seconds. But it did not matter. More came, always more. The humans treated their ships like ammunition, spending them freely to destroy Krell vessels. Lieutenant Dong Hyun and his special operations team moved through the corridors of a Krell destroyer, their magnetic boots keeping them secured to the floor in the zero-gravity environment. They had boarded the ship using a small stealth craft, cutting through the hull with plasma torches while the crew was distracted by the larger battle outside. Now they moved toward the ship's reactor room, placing explosive charges on key systems. The Krell crew tried to stop them, but the aliens moved slowly in the cramped corridors. They were built for open spaces, not close combat. Humans, however, had been fighting in tight spaces since they lived in caves. Dong Hyun's team reached the reactor and set their charges with practiced efficiency. They had done this same mission on 5 other ships today. They would do it on 5 more before their shift ended, assuming they survived that long. Charges set, he reported over his communicator. Evacuating now. His team rushed back to their boarding craft and detached from the Krell destroyer. 30 seconds later, the charges detonated. The destroyer's reactor went critical and the entire ship exploded, taking 2 nearby Krell vessels with it in the blast. The battle continued for 72 hours without pause. The humans rotated their crews in shifts, always maintaining pressure on the Krell fleet. They never gave the aliens time to rest, to repair, to think. Attack, retreat, rearm, attack again. Over and over, without mercy, without hesitation. By the end of the 3rd day, 3,000 more Krell ships had been destroyed. The survivors were exhausted, running low on ammunition and completely demoralized. They had never encountered an enemy like this. Most species surrendered when faced with overwhelming odds. The humans multiplied and attacked harder. Captain Daeyeon's ship took a direct hit from a human missile salvo during hour 68 of the battle. Her shields collapsed, her engines failed, and her crew began evacuating to the escape pods. She stayed on the bridge, trying to coordinate the evacuation, when human soldiers cut through her hull and boarded her ship. She drew her weapon, prepared to fight to the death. But the humans did not kill her. They disarmed her, secured her hands behind her back, and escorted her to their ship. They were not gentle, but they were not cruel either. They treated her with a professionalism that shocked her. On the human boarding craft, a medic named Unji examined Daeyeon for injuries. The Krell captain had a broken arm from the explosion and several cuts from debris. Hyunji treated her carefully, setting the bone and bandaging the wounds. "Why are you helping me?" Daeyeon asked in her halting English. "I came to conquer your world." Hyunji looked at her with tired eyes. "Because you are wounded and I am a doctor. We have rules about how we treat prisoners, even when we are at war, especially when we are at war." Daeyeon did not understand. In the Krell military, prisoners were a burden to be disposed of. But these humans treated her with care, even as they destroyed her people's ships in the space beyond. Commander Hyun-woo stared at the casualty reports, each number representing a ship full of soldiers who would never return home. Nearly 4,000 ships lost. Nearly half the invasion fleet, gone in less than 4 days of combat. And the humans were not slowing down. If anything, they were attacking with renewed fury. They had tasted victory and wanted more. "Admiral," he said quietly, approaching Ji-won's command chair, "we must retreat. We have lost too much. The invasion has failed." Ji-won's face was pale, her movements jerky with exhaustion and stress. She had not slept since the battle began. None of them had. "No, we advance. We will break through their defenses and land troops on their planet. Once we control their cities, they will be forced to surrender." "Admiral, that is suicide. They have destroyed half our fleet in orbit. What do you think they will do to us on their surface?" "They cannot maintain this pace forever," Ji-won shouted. "They will run out of ships, out of ammunition, out of people willing to die. We only need to outlast them." Hyun-woo said nothing more. He returned to his station and began calculating how many ships would survive the descent to Earth's surface. Part 2. First Contact, First Blood. The Krell fleet crossed into Mars orbit with their weapons armed and their shields at maximum power. Commander Hyun-woo watched the tactical displays carefully, looking for signs of human military presence. The red planet below appeared lifeless, its surface covered in rust-colored dust and ancient craters. A few small human installations dotted the landscape, research stations and mining operations that posed no threat. "Sensors detect minimal activity," reported Captain Daeun from her station. "The human presence here is negligible. Should we destroy the installations as a warning to Earth?" Admiral Jiwan considered this for a moment, then shook her head. No, they are not military targets. We will proceed directly to Earth. Let them see we are merciful to those who do not resist. The fleet began moving past Mars, maintaining their tight battle formation. Thousands of ships moving in perfect coordination, a display of military might that should have terrified any species watching, but still the humans sent no messages, no pleas for negotiation, no signs of panic. Then everything went wrong. The first explosion caught the fleet completely by surprise. A Krell destroyer on the outer edge of the formation simply vanished in a ball of superheated plasma. Before anyone could react, 3 more ships exploded. Then 10, then 50. Report. Admiral G1 shouted, gripping her command chair as the flagship's shields flickered under impact. Unknown weapons fire from all directions. Dayun's voice was strained as she worked her controls frantically, detecting thousands of small objects throughout the area. They're moving. They're autonomous! Hyunwoo pulled up the sensor data and felt his blood run cold. The entire space between Mars and Jupiter was filled with human weapons. Small platforms, each no larger than a ground vehicle, equipped with powerful missiles and guided by their own artificial intelligence. They had been drifting in space, appearing as nothing more than debris on long-range scans. Now they came alive, attacking the fleet from every angle. Evasive maneuvers, he ordered. All ships scatter and engage defensive fire. The beautiful formation dissolved into chaos. Krell warships attempted to avoid the attacks while trying to identify and destroy the platforms. But there were too many, and they were too small. For every platform destroyed, 2 more appeared from different vectors. The human weapons used hit-and-run tactics, firing missiles and then accelerating away at speeds the Krell had not thought possible for objects so small. Major Bora watched her tactical screen from the cockpit of her fighter, a satisfied smile on her face. The trap was working perfectly. For 50 years, Earth had been seeding the outer solar system with these autonomous defense platforms, thousands of them, hidden among the asteroids and space debris, waiting for the day an alien fleet would arrive with hostile intentions. Comet Squadron, you are clear to engage, came the voice of General Sung-ho from the command center on Earth. Show them what human pilots can do. Copy that, General. All fighters, follow my lead. Bora's squadron launched from their hidden position behind one of Mars's moons. 50 small fighters, each carrying a pilot whose family had trained for generations for this moment. They accelerated toward the Krell fleet, their experimental fusion drives pushing them to velocities that made the alien ships seem to stand still. The Krell had never encountered fighters like these. Human engineers had studied every bit of alien technology they could find, from crashed probes and salvaged equipment. They had learned how the aliens moved, how they fought, and they had designed their craft specifically to counter Krell tactics. Bora dove between 2 massive Krell cruisers, her fighter's small size making her nearly impossible to target with the aliens' large weapons. She released a spread of missiles, each programmed to target a different ship's engine section. The missiles struck home and both cruisers began listing as their propulsion systems failed. Target their engines, she called to her squadron. Make them dead in space. Let them drift and think about their choices. The battle raged for 6 hours. By the time it ended, 800 Krell ships had been destroyed or disabled. The survivors retreated to a safe distance beyond Mars orbit, regrouping and trying to understand what had just happened. On the flagship's bridge, Admiral Jiwan stared at the casualty reports in disbelief. 800 ships, nearly 10% of her fleet, gone in a single engagement against an enemy that was supposed to be primitive and helpless. How is this possible? She whispered. Commander Hyunwoo studied the battle recordings, watching human fighters dance between Krell ships like insects around large animals. The humans fought with a speed and aggression he had never encountered. They took risks no Krell pilot would consider, diving into crossfire and flying so close to exploding ships that they should have been destroyed by the blast waves. But they survived. They were that good. They were ready for us, he said quietly. They have been preparing for this day for decades. Perhaps longer. Impossible, Jiwan snapped. They could not have known we were coming. Perhaps not specifically, Hyunwoo replied. But they knew someone would come eventually. They looked at the stars and understood that they were not alone. And instead of hoping for peace, they prepared for war. Dr. Taeyang entered the bridge, his tablet showing data he had collected from the engagement. His hands were shaking. Admiral, I have analyzed the human weapons and tactics. They are using technologies we recognize but combined in ways we never considered. Their fighters are built from materials that should not exist. Their missiles use guidance systems more sophisticated than our own. And their pilots? What about their pilots? Ji-won demanded. They do not fear death, Taeyang said simply. I watched recordings of human fighters deliberately ramming our ships when they ran out of missiles. They sacrificed themselves without hesitation to destroy us. What kind of species does that? The question hung in the air unanswered. Hyunwoo knew the answer, though he did not speak it aloud. A desperate species. A species that had evolved fighting itself where every war was an existential threat. A species that had learned that sometimes the only way to survive was to fight harder than your enemy thought possible. We continue the attack, Admiral Ji-won said, her voice hard. Gather the fleet at Jupiter. We will plan our next move carefully. No more surprises. As the fleet moved toward Jupiter's massive gravity well, Hyunwoo intercepted a transmission from Earth. It was being broadcast on all frequencies, clearly meant for the Krell to receive. He played it on his private terminal, listening to the translated words. It was a message from General Sung-ho, the commander of Earth's military forces. His voice was calm and professional, with no trace of fear or uncertainty. To the Krell Dominion. You came to our home expecting an easy victory. You believed we would surrender when we saw your numbers. You were wrong. We are humanity. We have survived ice ages, plagues, asteroid impacts, and 5,000 years of warfare against ourselves. We have turned our own violent nature into our greatest weapon. Every soldier you face has trained their entire life for this battle. Every pilot knows they may not come home. Every citizen of Earth is willing to die to protect our world. You should have stayed away. The message ended. Hyunwoo sat in silence, processing what he had heard. Then he accessed the communication records and found something that made his blood run even colder. After the battle, when the Krell were retreating, the human military channels had been filled with chatter. He had the computer translate a sample of the messages. The humans were not afraid. They were excited. They were treating this like a sport, keeping score of enemy ships destroyed. They were making jokes. They were celebrating. One pilot had apparently become famous for destroying 3 ships in a single attack run. Others were trying to beat her record. The Krell had just killed 800 ships full of their people, and the humans were competing with each other to kill more. Hyunwoo stood and walked to the window of his quarters, looking out at the distant blue planet. For the first time in his 40 years of military service, he felt genuine fear, not fear of death. He had accepted that possibility long ago. This was something deeper. This was the fear of realizing that you had made a terrible mistake, and it was too late to undo it. The humans were not going to surrender. They were going to fight until either they won or their entire species was extinct. And based on what he had seen today, extinction was not their most likely outcome. Captain Da-un came to his quarters an hour later. She looked exhausted, her uniform stained with coolant fluid from emergency repairs. Commander, may I speak freely? Of course, we should retreat. Recommend to the Admiral that we withdraw and report back to the Dominion. Let them decide how to proceed. Hyunwoo wanted to agree. Every instinct told him to take his ships and leave this cursed system. But he knew Ji-won would never allow it. She had committed too much to this campaign. Her pride would not let her turn back now. The Admiral will not listen, he said. She believes we can still win, can we? Daeun asked quietly. Hyunwoo did not answer. He had no answer to give. Part 1. The Gathering Storm Commander. Hyunwoo stood before the massive viewing screen, his forearms crossed behind his back in the traditional Krell stance of authority. Behind him, the war room buzzed with activity as hundreds of officers coordinated the largest invasion fleet in galactic history. 9,900 warships. The number still amazed him, even after 40 years of leading conquests across the stars. Sir, the final battle groups have arrived at the staging point, reported Captain Da-un, her voice steady and professional. She was young for her rank, but Hyunwoo had personally selected her for this campaign. All ships report combat-ready status. Hyunwoo turned to face her, his vertical pupils narrowing as he studied the tactical display. The fleet stretched across space like a metal forest, each ship bristling with weapons that could crack planets. This was overkill, he knew. The target world required perhaps 100 ships at most. But Admiral Ji-won had insisted on this overwhelming show of force. Excellent, he replied. Have the science teams completed their assessment of the target species? Dr. Taeyang stepped forward, clutching his data tablet against his chest. The scientist looked nervous, as he always did before delivering reports to senior commanders. Yes, Commander. The humans of Earth are a primitive species, barely 2 centuries into their industrial age. They possess basic nuclear weapons and rudimentary orbital stations. Their largest warship is smaller than our shuttlecraft. Hyunwoo nodded slowly. This matched everything they had observed over the past 30 years. The Krell had been watching Earth since their long-range probes first detected radio signals emanating from the blue world. They had studied every broadcast, every satellite transmission, every military exercise. The humans were violent, yes. They fought amongst themselves constantly, waging wars over resources, ideology, and territory. But they were also divided into nearly 200 separate nations, each suspicious of the others. What concerns me, Dr. Taeyang continued, his voice dropping, is their unpredictability. In our observations, they have demonstrated remarkable adaptability. When faced with disasters, they respond with creative solutions. When attacked, they do not surrender easily. I recommend— Enough! Admiral Jiwan's voice cut through the room like a blade. She entered the war room with her usual commanding presence, her ceremonial armor gleaming under the lights. Your concerns are noted, Doctor, and dismissed. We have conquered 47 worlds. Earth will be the 48th. Hyunwoo watched the exchange carefully. Jiwan was ambitious, eager to secure this victory before the council elections next cycle. A successful conquest of Earth would guarantee her a seat among the ruling elite. She had pushed for this massive fleet despite protests from more cautious voices. The Dominion's resources were stretched thin, maintaining control over their existing territories. Committing nearly half their navy to one conquest was risky, but Jiwan would not be denied. She approached the viewing screen and activated the display showing Earth. The planet rotated slowly, its blue oceans and white clouds looking deceptively peaceful. This world will submit within 1 week. Their governments will surrender when they see our fleet. If they resist, we will destroy their military installations and force compliance. Standard protocol. Admiral, Hyunwoo said carefully, perhaps we should attempt communication first. Offer them terms. Give them time to understand what they face. Jiwan's expression hardened. Are you questioning my strategy, Commander? No, Admiral. I am simply suggesting caution. The humans may react unpredictably if cornered. Let them react, Jiwan said dismissively. They have nothing that can threaten even one of our ships, let alone 9,000. We will broadcast our demands in their languages. They will have 6 hours to respond. After that, we demonstrate our superiority by destroying their orbital stations. Once they see their defenses crumble, they will submit. They always do, Hyunwoo said nothing more. He had served under commanders like Jiwan before. Pride made them dangerous, made them careless. But he was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders. The fleet began its journey toward Earth 2 cycles later. They moved through the dark space between stars, their engines leaving trails of distorted space-time in their wake. The journey would take 20 days at cruising speed. 20 days for the humans to detect their approach. 20 days to watch their doom coming closer. Inside his private quarters, Hyunwoo reviewed the intelligence files again. He watched recordings of human conflicts, studied their tactics, analyzed their weapons. What he saw troubled him. The humans fought with a ferocity that seemed disproportionate to their primitive technology. During their most recent global conflict, they had fought for 6 years, refusing to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. Some of their cities had been reduced to rubble, yet the survivors continued fighting. They also showed remarkable innovation under pressure. When one weapon proved ineffective, they invented new ones. When their enemies adapted, they adapted faster. They turned everything into weapons, their vehicles, their tools, even their commercial aircraft. Nothing was sacred when survival was at stake, but they were also compassionate. He watched recordings of human soldiers risking their lives to save wounded comrades. He saw civilians sharing meager resources during famines. He observed their complex social bonds, their capacity for sacrifice. They were contradictions. Violent yet caring, divided yet capable of unity. Primitive yet innovative. Computer, he said to the ship's artificial intelligence, show me Earth's military response to natural disasters. The screen filled with images of human military forces responding to earthquakes, floods, and storms. They moved quickly, efficiently, coordinating across national boundaries when necessary. They adapted their tactics to each situation, using their limited resources with impressive effectiveness. Hyun-woo leaned back in his chair, a growing unease settling in his chest. Something felt wrong about this campaign. The humans were too quiet. Since detecting the Krell fleet's approach, they had not panicked. Their communications showed concern, yes, but also something else. Determination. Preparation. His communicator chimed. "Commander, we are approaching the edge of their star system. Admiral Ji-won, request your presence on the bridge." Acknowledged. "I'm on my way." As Hyun-woo walked through the corridors of the flagship, he passed thousands of soldiers preparing for battle. They checked their weapons, reviewed their orders, and spoke confidently of the coming victory. They had conquered dozens of worlds. Earth would be no different. But Hyun-woo could not shake his doubts. He had learned long ago to trust his instincts. Something was wrong. The humans were too calm. Their military forces were moving but not fleeing. They were repositioning, organizing, preparing. He reached the bridge and took his position beside Admiral Ji-won. The viewing screen showed the approaching star system. Earth's sun burned brightly in the distance, a yellow star similar to dozens of others they had conquered. "Begin the final approach," Ji-won ordered. "Broadcast our surrender demands on all human frequencies. Let them know that the Krell Dominion has arrived, and their world now belongs to us." The message went out in 47 human languages, transmitted across every frequency the humans used for communication. It was simple and direct. Surrender your weapons, submit to Krell authority, and your people will be spared. Resist and face annihilation. The fleet waited for a response. 6 hours passed. Then 12. Then 24. Finally, a message came back from Earth. It was brief, transmitted from their largest military installation. Hyun-woo listened to the translation and felt a chill run through his body despite the warm air on the bridge. The message said only, "Come and take it." Admiral Ji-won smiled coldly. "So they choose death, very well. All ships, advance to battle formation. Let us show these primitives what happens when they defy the Dominion." As the fleet moved deeper into the system, Hyun-woo stared at the distant blue planet and wondered if they were making the greatest mistake in Krell history. The humans had not begged for mercy. They had not tried to negotiate. They had issued a challenge. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered, "What if we are the ones who should be afraid?"